Hey, folks, and welcome back. Today, we're going to talk about the slow extinction of gaming's weirdos and why that might be a problem, at least according to Yoko Taro. I was browsing online this morning looking for an interesting article, and this one happened to pique my interest quite a bit. And this particular one coming from videogamer.com writer Lewis White, sharing a little bit about some thoughts Yoko Taro recently had. This article titled NieR creator Yoko Taro reveals the sad reality of modern AAA game development. Quote, there's less weird people making games. And Lewis covers in here a little bit about a Q&A that Yoko Taro recently did with fans. And in the Q&A, he mentioned, quote, I've been part of the game industry for 30 years, but I feel there's less weird people now. Quote, I don't know if this is something simply happening in my field of view, if the game industry ended up like this, or if the whole world is like this now. And I thought this was pretty interesting, but also wanted to add some commentary of my own and also some thoughts that Lewis had shared as well. I mean, Lewis talks a little bit about how back in the day, the AAA space was filled with some weirdos. He comments on Banjo-Kazooie or Conker's Bad Fur Day. Um, yeah, both very fun and interesting games. He calls them absolutely wacko. I like that. So hopefully that's not too much of a pass on those folks. But he also comments that in the AAA space, there are things that we still get that have that flair to them. One of those he points out is the Yakuza series from Sega. I mean, these games are, as he says, they are pretty crazy throughout certain parts of each of the games for sure. And if you haven't played them, I definitely recommend you do so. Um, and a lot of it seems to have shifted probably to more of the indie game scene, right? So a few of the games that they comment on is Undertale, uh, Doki Doki Literature Club, Disco Elysium. A few of these titles I'm not as familiar with, so getting over it with Bennett Body. I have not even ever heard that title. Now I got to go check it out. I'm going to take this and keep it somewhere for later. But anyway, some of the things that I wanted to share was a little bit about my perspective on the weirdos in the industry. I think Japan has been historically known for having the weird developers, right? Even going back into the earlier console generations, there was always a tinge of difference in how games were developed in the East and the West, right? And I feel like a lot of the more faux pas or like strange or weird stories, art styles, gameplay has always come from Japanese developers, particularly. I feel like Western developers, most American-based developers historically have tinged towards something a little more typical for their game development styles. And one of the eras in which I think that you see this shift a lot is during the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 era. You can see this in the way in which Japanese publishers and developers were approaching making video games. And one of the hard things that happened during that time for surely Japanese developers is that a lot of publishers were saying, hey, we own all of these IPs and have the licensing rights to these titles. And so we're going to take all of these franchises and license them out or straight up sell them to or partner with Western developers who can make more tame visions of our games because what Japanese publishers wanted at the time was more money, and they knew that they had to simplify the style, the messaging, the tone, the atmosphere of their video games, and so they had these Western developers step in to make something a little more typical that would appeal to broader audiences. And if you go and you visit any of those originally Japanese-owned IP franchises that were developed during that era, that's where we get a lot of the more mixed reception to those games. I mean, look at the earlier Silent Hill games versus Homecoming and Downpour. I mean, the reception is there's definitely a break off in terms of the gaming experience with people saying these are the original Team Silent games and these are the games that came after. And so I think that that was likely a challenging era for Japanese developers. I don't even know what they were working on at the time. I can't even mention somebody of the era who was not doing their best to see if they could get funding from Western-based publishers because in Japan they were just dumped. They were dumped and ditched on the ground, you know? So that makes it hard for weirdos to stay in the industry when they come from a general um, geographic area that specializes in that weirdness for the video game making space. But then also when they have no support at all from the publishers who brought them up and put them on a pedestal and made them the successes that they are. And so I think that that's a huge challenge. Another big thing, I think specifically, and Yoko Taro pointed this out as well, is that this probably is kind of a field of view thing going on because it is true that in the indie space, especially, there are a lot of still very strange games, strange concepts, strange stories, and unique gaming experiences that you're not going to get in AAA gaming experiences being made and developed. But this, as you think about the indie darlings that we've gotten over time, how many of those have come from Japanese indie devs? And that has nothing to do with the indie devs themselves, but mostly the infrastructure, right? I can't think about a big Japan-based indie conference. I can't think about a big indie publishing house. I don't know what kind of support the Japanese developers get in the indie space. And I think a part of it is because of the more doujinshi style model that has been so typical in Japan for self-publishing works. I mean, this is something that has, I'm sure, transferred between different mediums. For many, many years, manga has been often done under this doujinshi model or things like webtoons where people are just self-writing works and then they ideally can sell those off to a publisher or like a big studio house who's going to produce it. And so I think that maybe there's just a philosophy change needed in that space in order to really create and open up avenues for these weirdos to get their gaming concepts and ideas in front of players, and more importantly for them, in front of publishers who want to pick those games up and take them worldwide. Because the games that I often see coming out of the indie space in Japan are just ones that I happen upon on like PlayAsia when I'm looking around for games coming out. And those are mostly two channels, which one of those is like more novel adventure games where you're just kind of reading the game as you go along. And then the second half is these like chibi JRPGs that sometimes look pretty like AI generated, is the way I would put it. So there needs to be more exposure. It would be great if there's more exposure to these people and their weird ideas because I'm sure we would get fantastic games and surely a couple of hit franchise and IPs if they came along as well. So supporting indie development in-house is super important. And I would advocate that a lot of the big Japanese publishers, Sega or Square Enix or Capcom, they should have in-house development groups that are like, if you're going to make a AAA game and it's going to have a $50 million budget, well, how about you split up 20 teams of people and you give them all a $5 million budget and you have them just develop and produce a game? I've been watching Psychodicy, and it's something I'm going to recommend on this channel soon and talk a little bit about more on my thoughts. But Tim Schafer has a fantastic uh, in-house project that they used to do, and I advocate again that Microsoft allows them to continue to do it in the fashion in which they've done it previously. But that idea is Amnesia Fortnite, and it's essentially like Tim puts a pause on whatever big development projects are going on at the studio, and for a week or two, the everyone takes turns pitching game concepts to Tim. Tim chooses some, the studio chooses some, fans choose some, and then those games go on to get developed in like a very quick sprint. And from Double Fine, a lot of big successful games and game concepts have come from Amnesia Fortnite. And so that is a way to do it. And unfortunately, whether you're in Japan or you're in America or whatnot, the industry at large has been absorbed by business people. And business people are not interested in making interesting games. Business people are interested in making money. I mean, that's what they do. They're in business, right? And this is something that you see in Hollywood as well, where there's a lot of risk on taking a lot of money to make a game, and you have to make a lot of money back if you want that. And unfortunately, when there is no path forward with a smaller developed title, a small budget title, maybe has an interesting or weird game concept, I think it's challenging for publishers to see how they market it, how they communicate it to gamers, how they get it in front of people, and people say, I'm interested enough to try this out and buy it. And I wish people were a little more just open to trying weird games, but you know, they just aren't. And there's not much that we can really change about that. That's just how the cookie crumbles at the end of the day. So, um, those are some ideas and thoughts that I have. I would say Yoko Taro is not wrong that there's less weirdos making games, especially in the AAA gaming space. But certainly from his perspective in Japan, there's less of that. There's surely indie developers making games, but as somebody who consumes a lot of video game stuff, I rarely see it. And if I'm rarely seeing it, then the average person who's playing Madden and NBA 2K and then picks up the occasional God of War when it comes out, they're absolutely not seeing it. They're not engaging with it. It's not interesting to them. They don't even, it's not even on their radar. They couldn't even think about whether it's interesting to them. So that is a challenge. That is a real challenge. And so ultimately, I would say that both big publishers and here and in Japan and so on, everyone should be more supportive of in-house indie development. And I would say if you wanted to see a very interesting way that's on display in a studio, go watch Amnesia Fortnite. Those are so cool, and they paint a really quick picture of how it's done and how very cool concepts can come from the people who work at your studio and have these ideas. So, just my perspective. Curious to know what you think as well about both Yoko Taro's comments, but also just indie development at large. Where are the weirdos? Are they gone? They're definitely not gone. They're not being supported in the way that I think the industry could. So, anyways, if you like the video, please like the video and subscribe. Would love to have you join this community. And thanks again. I'll see you next time, guys. Stay well and stay healthy. Peace.